History is made in the Middle East. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe for the latest aviation news. Also be sure to leave a comment below. On Thursday, Bahrain announced that it would allow ELAL aircraft flying to and from the United Arab Emirates (UAE) to enter its airspace. The move follows a similar decision by Saudi Arabia on Wednesday and could substantially reduce flying times between Tel Aviv and the UAE. The Bahrain news agency issued a press release on September 3, stating that the kingdom would allow all flights between the UAE and all countries to cross its airspace. While Israel wasn't specifically mentioned, it is included in the decision. The announcement came from an official source at the Ministry of Transportation and Telecommunications. The source said that the Civil Aviation Affairs Department had approved the request it had received from the General Civil Aviation Authority in the United Arab Emirates in this regard. On September 2, the New York Times reported that Saudi Arabia would give Israel access to some of its airspace for the first time. The announcement was also at the request of the UAE. The decision could cut flight time between Israel and the UAE in half. According to the Times of Israel, Bahrain would only be on the flight path to the UAE if Qatar also allowed Israel into its airspace, which it doesn't yet appear willing to do. However, in an agreement dating back to the 1970s, Bahrain controls much of Qatar's airspace, so the opening of Bahraini skies could cut a further 20 minutes from flight times. The announcements from Saudi Arabia and Bahrain came just days after ELAL's historic first direct flight from Israel to Abu Dhabi, which notably crossed Saudi Arabian airspace before Wednesday's announcement. It was reported on August 31 that ELAL had requested permission to fly over Saudi airspace, but at the time, it had not been confirmed that Saudi Arabia had agreed. The flight carried high-level delegations from Israel and the United States, including Donald Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner. In welcoming the delegates on board, the pilot of the ELAL Boeing 737-900 said, "This flight records two significant events in the history of the State of Israel and in the region, heralding another step towards regional peace. For the very first time, an Israeli-registered aircraft will overfly Saudi Arabia, and, after a non-stop flight from Israel, land in the United Arab Emirates." He added, "At the end of this historic non-stop flight, the wheels of this aircraft, with the flag of the State of Israel on its tail, will touch down on the runway in Abu Dhabi, the capital of the UAE. This will be another significant event in our history. The normalization of relations between Israel and the UAE, and hopefully with other Arab nations to follow, opens up the potential for new routes for ELAL. The airline is already setting up a cargo corridor between Tel Aviv and Dubai from September 16. But the opening of the Arab nations' skies could also allow flight paths beyond the Middle East. Down the line, ELAL could open routes to India, Asia, and Australia, giving the airline potential to expand. History is made in